is going to be about the books that I've read in the past couple of months, from the end of November to the beginning of January. The first book that I read recently is this one here, which is This Summer. Will be different. This summer will be different. By Carly Fortune. This is a romance book set on a beautiful summery island, and it's about this woman, Lucy, who goes to her best friend's hometown on this beautiful island, but their flights get in at different times, so Lucy is waiting for her friend to get there, and she decides to go to this oyster restaurant, and she meets this handsome guy there, and they end up going home together, and then she finds out that this guy is her best friend's brother, and the story goes from there. I really liked this book. It wasn't a life-changing kind of book at all. It was just a fun, summery read, and it was peaceful and just very summery, beachy vibes, and I really liked it. I thought the characters were well constructed. There was nothing special really about them, but I still think it was a pretty good story. I really liked the forbidden romance trope. I thought it was good, and I haven't read much with forbidden romance, so yeah, I really liked this one. as I said, this book is a fantasy, and the world is basically structured around these gods, and there was a betrayal of one of the gods. At least I think it was multiple gods. Yeah, so this event called the Great Betrayal happened in this world where one of the gods was, the humans attempted to kill this god, and then she basically bestowed these curses upon different people, different royal families, I think it was, based on their role in this betrayal. And so one of the families, the curses affect their firstborn children for all of them, and one of them was that they have such striking beauty that nobody can stand to look at them. One is that they fall into this intense bloodlust, violence, frenzy. One was that they obtain so much knowledge that they go literally insane from how much knowledge they have. So I like the books without the sleeves on them. So the worst curse of all is the royal family bloodlines curse, which is that every night they fall into the shadows, which is basically like being dead. So they essentially are dead every night. And once they turn 21 or whatever, which is when all these curses hit their peak, the royal family's bloodline will permanently disappear into the shadows. So, in this book, one of the girls from the bloodline that has the stunning beauty, her older sister has that curse, and then the second-born children don't have curses, but she's supposed to have something called the sight, where she can predict things that are going to happen, but she doesn't have the sight, and so her tutor has this vision of her saving everyone, and so she sends her to be, like, I forget what her title was technically, but she's working for the king, basically. So she moves into the castle, and she starts to develop a relationship with the king, and the book is basically about her journey to save the king from disappearing into the shadows and prevent these, like, wizard mage people from taking over and stealing all the power from the royal family. So I really liked this. I think that the writing could have been a little bit better at times. I think certain parts of the plot were not very plausible. But overall, I think it was a cool concept and a fun book, and I really enjoyed reading it. I recommend this if you're looking for a fun fantasy read. I think this one is great. And this is The Half King by Lisa Landers. Okay, the next book I read was another fantasy, which was Bloodguard by C.C. Robson. I'm gonna take the thing off of this too because I hate the sound of these dust jackets on the book, and the hardcovers are just so pretty. So, this one I was drawn to because it's a gladiator book, which I have never read a gladiator fantasy before. And this plot follows a gladiator who is, I forget what the specific title is, but they need to win 4 matches, and then they win a title. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's just, the title is literally Bloodguard. So, I should have known that actually, but yeah, so they want to win the title of Bloodguard, and so they have to win 4 of these gladiator tournaments, but you're not necessarily pitted against another gladiator. You could be pitted against an it could be literally anything. So this book follows a gladiator. I forget his name because I can't remember anybody's name in any books, so let's cheat again. Leith of Grey. So Leith is the gladiator, and he's trying to win the title of Bloodguard to save his family. He has 2 younger sisters and a mother, and he wants to win the title of Bloodguard because you get unparalleled wealth and status. So he wants that so that he can get help for his sick sister. And then the older of his 2 sisters wants to learn how to read and write and become a writer. So he's trying to get money from this gladiator situation so that he can help his family. So he goes off and he sends them letters and stuff every here and there. He sends them whatever extra money he makes. And he's struggling to kind of keep his wits about him and win these different trials. It's really taxing. So he's struggling and obviously very injured after the first trial that's included in the book. And then this rich woman decides to take him under her wing because she is going to become queen, but she needs to marry before she becomes queen. So she wants to marry, either she has to marry somebody royal or she has to marry a bloodguard. So she was engaged to this guy, and then at the beginning of the book, the bloodguard Leith, he ends up challenging the guy that she was engaged to a duel, just randomly, and he kills him. So then that was her last prospect for a husband. Everybody else is either married or won't marry her because her father allegedly killed the queen before her. So there's this whole drama. And so she decides that she's gonna pick Leith because he's most likely to become a bloodguard. And she's gonna sponsor him and give him food and shelter and heal him because she's a healer. And then when he wins, they're gonna get married, and he's gonna be the bloodguard and she's gonna be able to become the queen, and everything's gonna be happily ever after, and he can help his sisters and whatnot. And the story goes on from there. And I really liked this book. I thought it was well written. I liked the premise of it. I think there were some really good twists in here that I didn't really see coming and didn't really expect. I do think that there were certain times in this book when certain events happened that didn't make any sense. Like, something devastating would happen, and then the 2 main characters would have like a romantic moment, and it just made absolutely no sense to me at times. So that was the one thing about this book that I didn't really think was very plausible and kind of ruined the experience a little bit. Not a ton, but just a little. And another thing is that I feel like this concept is kind of not medieval, but like, what's the word? It's kind of historical, you know what I mean? Like, it's not present day, it's not a futuristic situation, and the main character swears so much, like dropping F-bombs and saying all this, and it just does not make any sense for him to be doing that because it's so uncharacteristic of the time. It's like if you wrote about the Pilgrims and they all had cell phones or something. I don't know, it just was weird to me, so I didn't like that aspect of the book either. I also don't love senseless, like, cursing in books. I think it sounds so weird in literature. So, although I call it literature, but I literally read romance and fantasy, so I don't know how much backbone that has. But nonetheless, that is what I thought about this one. I would recommend this if you're looking for a fun fantasy book, but it wasn't like The Serpent and the Wings at Night, Fourth Wing, The Cruel Prince, all those series and so many more have been like wonderful escapes from real life, and you just get entranced into the book, and you get to escape real life for a brief moment. And this one wasn't really like that, because the not plausible parts of the book just kind of pull you out of the world a little bit. So yeah, I do think it's really good, but it's not one of those entrancing fantasy books, in my opinion. But yeah, it is really good. Okay, and then next I read another book from, I think at this point I can call him my favorite author ever, who is Frederick Backman, and he wrote Anxious People, A Man Called Of. I'm sure he wrote many more books. You can see a few of them in here and see if you recognize any of these. Us Against You, Bear Town, Brett Murray Was Here, and then Anxious People and A Man Called Of, as I mentioned. And there's also a page somewhere in the front of the book with all of his different books that he's written. He has some amazing stories that are just so lovely, and yeah, I can't find it, but he is probably my favorite, if not one of my favorite authors, for a reason. I think that his writing is incredible. And so this book is about this little girl, Elsa, who is best friends with her grandmother, who she calls Granny. And at the very beginning of the story, no spoiler, like the first chapter, she finds out that her grandmother has cancer, and she's been in the hospital, but that she's 7, or I think she's 7 in the book, so she doesn't really understand why her grandmother's in the hospital. And so she is this little know-it-all, awkward 7-year-old girl who gets bullied a lot and has no friends. Her only friend is her grandmother. Her parents are divorced, and she just doesn't have the best life, but her grandmother is, as I said, her best friend, and every night when they go to sleep, they go to this place that they call the Land of Almost Awake, and Granny will tell her these fantastical stories and make up all this crazy stuff about this fantasy world called the Land of Almost Awake, and it's like heaven to Elsa. It's the best thing, and it's what gets her through all the bullying, and her granny just understands her and helps her get through all her struggles in school. Her granny picked her up from school and was never late, and she was just this big personality, this crazy, wild woman with she does not hold back. So, Granny dies at the very beginning of the book, but she leaves behind a letter for Elsa. She wants her to deliver this letter to someone in there. They live in this big house with a bunch of apartments, and one of the main parts of the plot is that this woman, Britt Marie, is trying to make a leaseholders association so that they can all have equal ownership of the house, something like that. So she is given a letter that she needs to deliver to one of the people living in these apartments in the house, but it's this really scary person that they call the Monster. So she has to basically like face her fears and go confront this monster and give him this letter. And then when she does that, it's this whole trail of letters of different people that her grandmother wanted her to deliver letters saying that she was sorry to. And the thing I love about Frederick Backman's writing is that he makes all these dynamic characters that are so different from one another, but he intertwines their lives in the craziest, most unexpected ways. And as the stories go on, he just unfolds exactly how their lives connect. And this one, I think I enjoyed more than any of his other books I've read. I thought it was so incredible. This is one of my favorite books that I've read in so long. I think everybody would like this, and everybody needs to read this. It is so good. He has such a whimsical way of writing. It's so, like, quirky, but in such an enjoyable way, and I just think his books are near perfection, in my opinion. So if you're looking for is The Songbird and the Heart of Stone by Carissa Broadbent. Now this is I think that the thing with this series is that there are duologies, and there's going to be 3 duologies. So there was one duology about, so there are different houses, the House of Night, the House of Shadow, the House of Blood. I think that may be it. I think there's just 3. So the first duology was about the House of Night, and it was about this human girl who enters these big trials and tries to win so that she can get some power in this vampire-ridden world, so that she doesn't have to be afraid. And then this book follows one of the side characters from that first book series, and it follows this character named Misha, I think it is. And so she was turned into a vampire. Once again, I'm going to take this cover off because I hate the cover, and it's so pretty underneath. So, there are humans and vampires in this world, and Misha was a human, and she was spreading this religion of the god of the sun, and she got turned into a vampire while she was going on a mission to try to show the sun god that vampires could be saved and they could be loyal worshippers of the sun. So she gets turned, and she ends up getting all wrapped up in the vampire world, and then she eventually finds the man who turned her into a vampire, and she kills him. And then, since she did that, she knows she's in some deep doo-doo. So she leaves the House of Night, and she wanders off. I forget exactly what she was trying to do, because I think they mentioned it in the first book, the first duology. But she wanders off, and she ends up getting found by the House of Shadow, which is where the man that turned her was from. He was a prince of the House of Shadow. So she killed a prince of this kingdom, and so they imprison her, and they want to publicly execute her and send her body back to the House of Night because her 2 best friends are the king and the queen. And then the illegitimate son of the king ends up declaring that she be spared because he needs her for a journey. So the king agrees to spare her because she has the power of the sun, because the sun god selected her when she was a kid and made her one of his wives. So she goes on this journey with the Prince of Shadow into the underworld, which there's a cool map in here that you can look at. So they go to the underworld, and basically you find out at the beginning, so once again, not a spoiler, but he's trying to resurrect the god of death with necromancy, and he needs the power of the light to do so, because the sun god is the one that killed the god of death originally. So he takes Misha, his name is Asar. His name is Asar. I remembered it because I just read this. So he takes Misha to the underworld, and they go on this journey through all those levels that I just showed you on the map to retrieve one artifact from each level and set up a necromancy ceremony ritual to resurrect the god of death. So that is the premise of the plot, and obviously romance develops. Yeah, it was a very good book. I just love Carissa Broadbent's writing style. I think it's incredible. Something about it is just next level. I don't know what it is, but everything she writes is just so, I don't know. This book, one thing I will say about it is I didn't really understand the underworld mechanics, which kind of ruined a little bit of the realism. Well, not realism because it's fantasy, but it ruined a little bit of the, like, my ability to understand the plot when they would transition from each layer of the underworld to the next. I didn't really understand how they were safe at some points and in danger at others, and how lovers, but it was very baby enemies to lovers.